The snow remembered the shape of the dead. It took him in with no protest when he fell among it, and it took his heat, his breath, his last stubborn threads of thought. The night was cold, and the wind off the wall cut like a knife, and the blood that soaked his black doubled his weight until the world was stone and iron, and the whisper of men's voices sang words that had no warmth in them. For the watch, for the watch. There was no watch in the darkness that swallowed him. There was only the hot press of a heartbeat not his, and the taste of iron and fat on a tongue that was not a man's. Ghost came for him as if he had been waiting all along just inside the skin of the world. The wolf's eyes were full of winter, and the scents that broke over John were a flood. The tar of pitch, the sour cold of men, the clean knife edge of the wall's ancient ice. His own blood turned brown on fur, the strange sharpness that clung to the red woman and her fires, the fear that rode like a bitter herb in the throats of the men who had stabbed him. He did not count their footsteps or remember their names. Ghost did not measure hate. He knew the difference between pack and not pack, and not pack had raised short bright fang things and made the air shriek, and pack had fallen on his side, and that was wrong. The wolf took the cold with a growl and leaped, not with his body, not yet, but with memory. He was in the dark behind eyes that saw in blacks and silvers, in whites bright as spilled milk, and the wind was a living thing that picked up every secret and delivered it to his nose. He could smell old bear's raven tucked in some rafters, ruffling black feathers and whispering a single black word to itself, greedily, always greedily. He could smell Tormund Giant's Bane laughing somewhere because Tormund laughed when he didn't know what else to do. He could smell the wall itself, old as a remembered sin and full of ancient sleeping things that were not men and were not wolves. He reached for the body and found a hollow place where he had been. It frightened him, that hollow, and he filled it the only way a wolf knows, with the certainty of teeth and the wakeful talk of blood. Men shouted. Torches made fat, soft roaring sounds and stank of pitch. The red woman's voice cut through them all, clean and cold as a blade put in snow. She had kinds of heat the snow could not eat. She was speaking his name, or some name near enough that Ghost's ears pricked, and he turned so suddenly that men fell back from him and swore. "Bring him," she said. "Bring him and the wolf." There were hands on his body, thick fingers and clumsy gloves, muttering, grunts as if moving a corpse took a piece of them with it, and perhaps it did. Ghost flowed alongside, smelling his own flesh, his own hair, the way his blood had crusted to a dark sweetness. He was not all wolf, for there was a string still running from Ghost back to the shell on the table under the red woman's stare. She held it between thought and mouth as if it were a tether, and she sang to it, and her song was made of names and hunger. Whatever door she had found, she opened it. He went back with a snarl because silence had teeth and was swallowing him. He went back because Ghost went with him, and because the red woman's eyes were hot coals and there were words men had spoken over steel that would not let him sleep. John came back like a man breaks the skin of a frozen pond. Tearing, gasping, stung in every part, furious without knowing at whom. The world crashed over him. Light air, pain like the bite of 100 tiny mouths. He tried to stand and his knees remembered the knives. He lay there and shook like a hound that has come in from a river and cannot shed the cold lodged in the marrow. Melisandre bent near. The rubies at her throat were embers that made their own air, and her breath smelled faintly of cinnamon and smoke. "Snow," she said, and the word was a promise and a warning both. "Be welcome to your breath again." His own voice went ragged. "How long?" "A night that will be told differently by each man who lived it and all the same by the wall," she said. "A night, 1,000 years. Does it matter? You have returned." He remembered their faces with a clarity so sharp it was like looking through clean, new ice. Bowen Marsh, eyes wet and mouth set as if he were swallowing his own heart. Ser Alistair cold as a drawn blade. Men he had eaten with, laughed with, taught the sword. He remembered the words they had used to turn him into meat, and he tasted snow. "Did you?" He did not know how to finish that question. "I kept what I could." Melisandre's smile was as thin as new frost on black water. "Fire does not make promises to snow. It simply burns. Later, after the shaking had left him and he could take broth without spilling half of it, after Tormund had come and warmed the air with his loudness and departed again with an uncharacteristic gentleness in the set of his big hands, Jon stood alone on the Lord Commander's tower and looked south across the white that made the world one thing. When the wind dropped, the silence pressed his ears. It felt like standing inside a stopped heart. Ghost sat with him, a shade of white on white, his breath a steady plume. Their thoughts brushed. Jon touched the wolf's hunger. Meat, blood, the desire to run a clean track for the sake of the heart's drumming. Beneath it, something older. Pack, the silent question that the world asked with every new scent. Friend? Not friend? He put his hand in Ghost's ruff. The wolf's warmth anchored him to the tower and to his skin. I am not your Lord Commander anymore, he told the wind. The words surprised him with how right they felt, how they fell into the world and stayed there without question. I died, and my watch is ended. He had a sister in Winterfell. No, he had the shape of a lie wearing his sister's face in Winterfell, and men called it a marriage to make it moral. He had a father's house taken by flayers and oathbreakers. He had a name that the North had whispered to itself in the dark. Stark. He had a wolf. Word came up the King's Road like carrion birds do in hard weather. Stannis had vanished into a snarl of snow and rumor. Freys infested Winterfell like vermin. Roose Bolton wore his calm like someone else's skin, while his son sported his cruelty openly and dared men to look away first. The Manderleys feasted and plotted under White Harbor smoke. The Umbers were split against themselves. Crowfood in the woods with Stannis and Horsebane at the Dreadfort's call. The mountain clans watched from their rocks and said little. Every tree is full of ears, Tormund told him, slapping snow from his boots at Jon's hearth. The North ain't dead. It sleeps and snores and bears a tooth if you poke it. You mean to poke it? Jon's hand found Ghost's ear and rubbed until the wolf's eyes slitted. I mean to wake it. Wake it with a whisper or a shout? With a howl. Melisandre watched him from a little distance as he said it, and Jon felt the pinch of fate's fingers working something over the fire. He did not care what name she would give it. In the nights after he shed his last fever, he slept and woke in a fox's run, in a snowy owl's soft, chill stare, in the sinew spring of Ghost's body. He slipped from skin to skin as easy as a man pulls on a glove that has warmed to his hand. It made him hungry in a way that had nothing to do with bread. It also made him wary. In the wolf, the world was truer, easier. It would be simple to let the man thin into something that only spoke in winter and teeth. He went beyond the wall with Ghost and two silent wildlings who had names like wind and had not spoken them in years. They moved under furs heavy with snow, through hollows where the cold pooled like water at dusk, and the sky was so close and hard a blue that it seemed to ring like steel when the wind struck it. They found wolves. Not direwolves, not all. Their kind were rare even in stories. But wolves came, gray and rangy, bellies labored thin by winter, ears pricked. Some were scarred, with torn ears and one eye clouded, one leg stiff. They came because Ghost was not quite a thing that could be denied, and because there was meat. A great red stag felled clean by arrow and patience, and because wolves will always come where another wolf waits without fear. Jon knelt in the snow and let the world narrow to breath and heartbeat and scent. Fear is a taste, he learned. Courage, the absence of it, is another. He kept his back still, his head low, his hands open on his knees. The nearest wolf, a slate bitch with a white blaze on her chest, came close enough that he smelled the old blood in the fur under her jaw. She put her nose toward his hand and puffed steam on it. He did not move. Ghost stood behind him, a pale statue. The bitch's muscles shivered like a drawn bow, and then she leaned and touched her open mouth to Jon's palm, a breath's weight. In that touch there were 1,000 messages that needed no words. I could take. I choose not to. You are not nothing. You are not mine. You might be Pack. He went into her the way a man goes through a door he has never used before and finds a room that smells like childhood. The rush of it startled him, the clarity, the cold. He blinked her eyes and saw Jon Snow crouching in the snow like a supplicant, and Ghost behind him like a carved thing out of old tales, and the trees, and the sky full of hard flakes that the wind kept biting into his fur. He felt the weight of winter on his shoulders and the steady comfort of the pack moving restlessly around, measuring this man with their eyes. The bitch's name was not a name men would use. It was the memory of a den where the earth had breathed warmth into her belly and of the first bright snap of mouse between teeth. It was the ridge of her backbone under a wolf's mouth when he mounted and she did not turn to bite him. It was the particular itch between shoulder blades that never went. John did not need the name. He needed the shape of her mind and the bow of her hunger. He pressed his will there the way a rider puts his knees to a horse and found that she would turn if he asked, would not if he demanded without respect. He turned, and a world turned with him. Wolves' ears lifted. Tails changed their angle, subtle as knives shifting in sleeves. The pack felt him and ghost like weather coming. He hunted with them that day, not because he wanted meat but because he needed to be the thing he was telling them he was. He was quick in snow. He learned the way to pick the fragile crust and spread his weight. He tasted hot hair and clean snow and blood that steamed and was sweet as marrow. He yelped a question and the pack answered without thought. When night fell and the cold sharpened, he went back into the man with the reluctance of a boy leaving a fire. "You took to it?" said one of the wildlings by the campfire, watching him with eyes that were as expressionless as stones until they flashed pale as a startled owl's. "Your skin fits easy." John rubbed Ghost's muzzle. "I was born with half of it on." The wildling shrugged. "I knew a man who forgot which half he was. He took the woods and the forelegs, and it suited him until he found out the woods forget you back. When he wanted to speak to his son, he could only show his teeth. "I won't forget," John said, but he dreamed of running, and woke with his tongue stiff with fur and the memory of scents still breaking over him like surf. They went south of the wall where the land dropped into the north's wide white belly. There were old roads that men had tramped for thousands of years, and new paths cut by armies and storms, and between them the wolfways no man marked except where the snow kept record. Winterfell held the center of the world as the only warm place in a dream of cold. Smoke rose from it as if from a sleeping beast that refused to die. John could feel the pull of that smoke on some part of him that would always be a boy in the crypts touching stone wolves and wondering where his was. From the dark edge of trees, he watched a little column of men trudging up the King's Road with ill-fitting furs and shields that swung with every step. Fry blue and gray peeped beneath their cloaks, the paint fading. They were singing some bawdy song to keep the cold out of their teeth and to pretend none of them knew how men died in the snow. The wind stole the ends of their song and brought John the stink of their hunger and unwashed fear and the rancid fat they had eaten 3 days ago. He sent the wolves. He did not send them like a lord sends a banner with a hand gesture. He sent them with his mind and ghosts, a tug in the gut, a pricking in the ears. The pack flowed outward into the white, low and liquid, each a separate decision threaded to a single will. They vanished. Snow closed. Men kept walking. One looked up, fumbled with his scarf as if his neck had begun to itch. The wolves reappeared without warning, quick and deliberate, striking the edges of the column where the fear smells were strongest, where the shields were loose, where a man limped and no one had wanted to notice. A man in fry gray went down screaming. Another dropped his spear and put his back to another man's back, curses flying out of his mouth like sparks. John kept them from dying too quickly. That was the art. Wolves killed for food, and because killing bad meat was waste, they would take the easiest fast mouthful and be gone. John wanted terror, not waste. He wanted the wolves to show teeth and to leave men watching the shadows, knowing those teeth had not eaten all they might. He let a big doggish gray take a man's hand and then released it. He let the white-blazed bitch knock another man from his feet and stand with her paw on his throat, breath fogging his face, and then leave. He had them break the formation like a boy breaks a crust over new puddle ice. Crack here, crack there, and then let those cracks widen by themselves. By the time the wolves melted into the trees again, the Freys were no longer singing. They were speaking quickly and low and holding too tightly to their shields. When the snow took the wet stains their blood made, it left no color, but the wolves carried those tastes in them, and John carried the wolves. Word runs along roads faster than boots do. By midwinter, the tales were colder than the air. White wolves made of the wall itself that slipped into camps and stole men at the edge of sleep. A pair of eyes in the snow like winter's own lanterns. The forest putting fur on and hunting again. Cautious men lit bigger fires. Foolish men put dogs at their tents' flaps. The dogs curled into themselves and whimpered at sounds they could not own. Inside Winterfell, where stone held a little warmth underfoot, Theon Greyjoy sat on a bench in a forgotten corridor and stared at his hands. They had all their fingers now, but they remembered missing them. They remembered cold like a man remembers the taste of a woman he loved once and betrayed. He had learned not to move too quickly. Rattles make masters look up. He had learned to keep his eyes low and his smile neutral and to walk past mirrors as if they were open pits with no bottom. The wolves came to Winterfell first as a sound that was almost not a sound. It lifted the hair on his neck and made the old names in him stir like fish in black water. He knew that sound. Every Northman knew it, whether he had ever seen a wolf or not. A thing older than iron. Some men laughed because that is the only way to carry fear without spilling it. Ramsay Bolton did not laugh. Ramsay's mouth bent in that way it had when some invisible part of him hurt and he wanted to make it stop by making someone else bleed. At night, the howls went under the windows like knives under a door, testing. Horses shied in their stalls and sweated until steam rose off them. The kennels turned restless. Hounds that had torn men with relish put their heads to the straw, as if some memory had slipped their minds all at once. Gray men with scars and small dark eyes posted twice as many guards. Roose Bolton did not change his face. He slited a bit of meat with his blade and held it in long fingers and ate with small bites as if the meat might try to leap up and run away. Snow fell, and the wolves moved in it like the idea of silence. Each morning there were tracks at the edges of sight. Men went out in groups of 7 to gather firewood and came back in groups of 5. You could pretend 7 had been a mistake if you did not count the boots lined up by the hearth at night. The free riders began to sleep in their saddles. The dead wore Bolton pink when they came back from the snow. The wolves did not care about cloaks. Jon kept careful watch on himself. The part of him that was man needed feeding as much as the wolves. He ate, slept, bled in the cold air, practiced with Longclaw until his breath hurt like fire. He kept Tormund near because Tormund clattered and filled the ears that might have listened too closely to things that had no words. He kept the Red Woman at arm's length because she knew too much and her gaze made the back of his neck itch. She watched the wolves when they came and did not smile, which told him she was more dangerous than her smile would have been. "Do you seek a crown?" she asked him once by the fire, the red stones drinking the light. "It would fit your hair, Snow." He snorted. "The North does not need another crown. It needs to be itself again. And who will let it be?" Her eyes never moved from his face. Jon tasted the bitter laugh and swallowed it. "Someone who will feed it, and not with its own children's flesh." She tapped a finger against the arm of her chair. "Names matter to men. They make the shape of what they will bend their knee to. You wear one name and carry another, and the one you carry burns my tongue. Say it aloud, and it may change the world." "I will say my name to the heart tree," Jon said. He did not add that he had already said it there every night for a month in the quiet of his mind. The gods would listen with its old eyes. What it answered, if it answered, came to him in the stir of leaves at the very edge of hearing, and the way the wolf in him would pause and turn his head as if catching the faintest scent of green. The mountain clans came down from their hard hills like stones that had decided to move. Tall men with frost in their beards and women with knives longer than a Frey's courage watched Jon, as if looking at a knife they would share if it proved sharp. Wools and Norreys, littles and burleys. They came in 1s and 2s, and then by 10s, quiet as owls. They brought with them stories like packs on their backs. The stories were about sons who had not returned from the Dreadfort summons, about daughters married into quiet dead houses, about flayed skins hanging on roads like wet shirts. They listened while Jon did not promise them anything but work and blood and the chance to feed the North to itself rather than to strangers. The first time Jon sent wolves to drive a herd of stolen Carhold cattle straight through a fry camp at noon, men said the North had opened a strange new eye. when he sent them in a new moon to worry the edges of the Riswell's foragers. And the wolves left every man alive and took only the provender. Men said the north had grown hands. When a Bolton rider was found in the morning with his face unmarked and his throat a torn red grin, and the wolves' prints around him wrote no story of feeding, men said such eyes and hands had an old name, Warg. That name brought with it older names that lay at the bottom of men's tongues like stones under ice. King's blood, wolf's blood, Stark. John wore no crown in those days, but the north began to bend around him as water bends around rock. He did not go alone. Tormund brought 140 free folk from the Gift and more from the haunted forest, who did not mind calling the snows home so long as they could stretch their legs and stick steel into men's bellies that needed it. Among them were skin changers who had worn hawk and fox and wolf for so long their eyes had learned to keep secrets. One, an old woman whose name had been given to a river, spoke only to wolves and to John. She would wake in the night and whisper to the darkness, and the darkness would answer in the small scurry of paws under the walls. In Winterfell, Theon came to Jane in cracks and corners where fear could not be heard. She was shaking half the time, and when she stopped, the stopping looked like a new kind of shaking. He told her lies and then some truth, because men must season truth with lies to make it go down. "I will take you out," he said in the quiet under the kitchen stairs that smelled of flour and mice. "Wolves wait outside." She stared. He could not tell if she was going to laugh or scream. "Wolves? They are not all beasts. How would you know?" He shut his eyes and for once did not see blades or flame. "I know." The howls grew nearer as the days shrank. Winterfell sat in a haze of its own breath. Roose began to loosen his calm. Slightly, the way a man undoes one button at his throat to admit air, and that was as good as fear on another. He sent men to the woods with dogs. The dogs found nothing but their own tails and the places where the wolves had been hours earlier. He sent more men and then stopped because men were not coming back. The night they went out, the weather had one of its sudden, deepening moods. The snow fell in those small, dry flakes that look innocent and turn the world to confusion by the sheer number of them. Theon pulled Jane in a white cloak he had stolen from a rack of fine gifts meant for better days and better names, and he took her by the places he knew too well. In another life he would have been proud of how clever he was, but cleverness had been flayed off him along with too many other things to count, and all that was left was a kind of doggedness that did not make a good story but got you to the door. They slipped out into a world that was made of turning flakes and the smell of their own breath. For a coward's blink of a moment Theon thought he had been made a fool by his own hope. The snowfield was empty. Then it moved, and he saw it for what it was. Wolves in the white, rising as if he had called the ground up. One of them stepped forward, so pale his eyes were the only dark on him, and those eyes caught Theon like a hook. Ghost's breath plumed between them. Jane made a small sound he had heard in animals. The wolves paced around them and waited for some word without words. Theon felt foolish then, for he had no way to speak to beasts, and perhaps they had come to take what these two men-cub things had to offer, which was not much. He thought of kneeling and then did not, because kneeling had too many meanings in his life and few of them were ones he could bear. The pale wolf turned his head as if listening to some signal Theon could not hear. Then he stepped past them and vanished into the white. The rest of the pack flowed after him. They left a corridor in the snow that Theon and Jane walked as if it had been carved in ice. They came to a line of trees where men waited. No torches. Torches make promises to the night it will always break. The leader moved like cold does, quiet, deliberate, unbending. The sound he made when he spoke was a man's sound, but the wolves turned their heads to it. Theon knew that voice, and all the lives that had been his lay down for a heartbeat, peace like a hand on a fevered brow. "My lord," he said, and the word tasted like ash and absolution both. "John." John looked at him with eyes that were not ghosts and yet were. Ice had gathered on the fur at the shoulders of his cloak, and his hair held a dusting of flakes. There was new age in his face, winter etched in clean, fine lines at his mouth and eyes. The sword at his hip was black and had a wolf's head in its pommel. "Theon," he said. He did not call him Reek. "You did well. You brought her out. She is not Arya. The confession leaped out of him like a fish from black water, and once it was out, he felt lighter even in the cold. Jane Poole. They call her Stark so men will not choke on what they are doing. I know, Jon said, and the knowledge in his voice was a hard thing with clean edges. We will not let them use her skin to make their lies strong. He sent them as far as the village of the Little Lakes, where women with scarred hands and old men with good knives could hide a girl better than knights could. When the snow took their tracks, the wolves took the scent at the edges of danger, and Jon turned his face toward Winterfell again. He went to the weirwood in the black of a night without moon and stood under its pale, bloody leaves. The face in the trunk was older than snow and did not look kinder for it. The red sap that had once bled from its mouth was a frozen tear now, thick and dark. Jon put his hand to it. The cold shot up his arm to his shoulder and took his breath. He closed his eyes. The world turned to wood and wind. It had a cleaner order when he saw it in that way. The wolves' paths lay bright as veins. The men's breath lifted up like banners to be counted, measured, planned. Somewhere far to the north, in a cave that had seen the first men kneel, a boy with a 1,000-year stare looked south with eyes not wholly his own. Jon felt him the way one feels a hand through a cloak. Brother, the world said without lips, come and see. I cannot, Jon told the tree. I have to put my feet here. The answer came in a rustle like mice running. The leaves moved though no wind came down into the god's wood. The shape that the rustle made was a picture in his mind, and the picture was wolves boiling through a broken gate and men forgetting how to hold a spear. He tasted copper and finished plans and older things. A pack's simple arithmetic, how many mouths, how many deer, how much snow. He opened his eyes and the leaves were still again. Then come, he told the wolves. When the snow went soft one afternoon and then hardened again at dusk into a surface like brittle glass, Jon set his men and beasts like a hand in a glove. The free folk under Tormund took the west, where the ground broke and gave cover. The mountain clansmen came down in silent lines and put themselves along the low ridge that ran like a crouch toward Winterfell's west gate. The wolves ranged ahead, a pale mist on the ground, slipping in and out of the scant trees, making the air hush around them. Jon moved among them as a man moves among his own thoughts. He sent men first not with steel but with a sound. The bullhorn sounded twice, the mountain note that speaks to valleys. It rolled off stone and across snow and made horses stamp in their stables. Men lifted their heads to ask one another what it meant. Before the question turned to answer, the wolves answered it with their voices. The long, layered howl rose and rose until Winterfell's walls drank it like wine and shook with it. No Fry alive had ever heard such a howling and owned it. The west gate opened because that is what gates are for, and because men who are afraid and proud will open them if it means they can stand under the sky and call themselves brave. The sortie came out in a decent line, shields overlapping, spears like gray teeth, hounds running on either wing. Ramsay Bolton rode at their center. He had put scarlet on as if blood warmed him. When he smiled, there were little flakes of snow on his lip, like foam on a rabid dog's mouth. The wolves went for the hounds first because wolves know their own kind. The hounds ran out barking, joy in their throats that went thin when the smell of the pack washed over them and told them story after story they did not want to hear. The first clash was all sound and white flurry. A big gray hit a mastiff on the side and rolled him shoulder to shoulder, and was up again before the mastiff had thought pain. The white-blazed bitch took a brindled cur by the ear and tore until the dog screamed like a man. Then the pack flowed around the hounds like water around stones and set their eyes on meat with men inside it. Jon held them on the edge of the spears. He let them tease the line, mouths opening and shutting like questions. The men's eyes went back and forth, wolf, spear point, wolf again, and in that going back and forth fear crept in like a draft under a door. One man in fry gray, face shining with sweat though the air was cruel, made a stab at a wolf too far to reach, and the man next to him moved out of position to keep the space from feeling like a wound. There. Jon felt it. The line's breath caught. He sent the boy from the Littles in with the hillmen, just 5, just enough to make the line pay attention to too many things at once.
Stil ran.
Wolves poured under the cropped skirts of shields and snapped at calves and backs of knees. Men went down without holes big enough to kill them and discovered that the snow could drown if you fell face first into it with terror in your mouth. Ramsay rode forward a length and raised a horn. He thought to answer wolf with hound and hill with heraldry. John saw the motion as if it had been told to him yesterday, and he had all day to prepare his reply. Ghost was at his knee, not in front, not yet. Now, John said, and it was a breath, not a shout. But the wolves heard, and the men who had been waiting to be the men they had promised themselves they were heard too. They broke the west line as a boot breaks a rotten plank. The wolves drove through where the spears were not, and the hillmen thrust quietly where men did not expect anything quiet in battle. The free folks' long knives found ribs and soft places. The phrase learned that armor does not cover everything if the thing striking you knows what it is looking for. Ramsay's horn spilled a braying note and then silence when a stone from a sling found the man's throat before he could blow again. The rider who had been on his right fell backward like a cut sapling as a gray wolf leaped and took him by the face, the weight of him dragging rider and horse both into the drift. Ramsay was not a fool. He turned his horse's head quick as thought, intent on the gate and the narrow place where men might make a stand if they dared. John pressed not to take him, not yet. It was not Ramsay's back he wanted in that moment. It was the heart of Winterfell to hear the sound of battle in its own belly and remember whose it was. He let enough wolves run at the horse's haunches to make men on the walls lean forward and squeal. He sent the rest into the yard when the gate lurched open a heartbeat too wide and too slow for men who had never fought wolves while holding wood. They went over the threshold like a white tide. The yard, churned by boots and hooves and the perpetual useless labors of men trying to keep walkways clear, became a mess of motion and blood. Everything that had belonged to the Boltons by custom of fear belonged to the slightest touch of the pack's thought now. Men clutched at what they had always clutched at. Orders, lines, the idea of themselves as brave, and found those things slippery as fish in winter water. They slew and were slain, and some ran. Wolves ran faster. One leaped high and slapped a fry standard out of the air with a bite that took cloth and fingers both. That small act sent a shout through Winterfell like a rumor. Said, "There is no safety in cloth." Roose Bolton came out of the great hall with careful steps, as if the snow might judge him for hurrying. His pale eyes took in the wolves with a distaste he reserved for grease under his nails. He looked at his son and at the holes wolves had made in lines and at the long white animal with red eyes that stood at the center as if all the rest had been put there to stand around him. His face did not change. He turned to find the man with the biggest voice on the wall and told him something that sent men running to the east gate and to the casks of oil. John walked through it. He did not run. Running makes men's eyes stick to you and their knives swing without aim. He walked with Ghost at his shoulder and the weight of Longclaw a dark line at his back, and wherever he stepped, wolves moved as if he had drawn a circle in the air and asked them to fill it. He could not taste his own fear because he had put too much else on his tongue. He found the godswood by the path his feet had known since he was a boy. Snow clung to the limbs of the heart tree like white flesh. The face in the bark watched the yard's wolves dragging a fry under the low boughs and doing what the world requires. "Father," John said, because that was what men said there when they needed themselves to be truer. The silence listened. He thought for a breath. He heard small feet in snow and felt a bird's wing brush his cheek. And then there was only the sound of tearing and men crying out and the long high voices of wolves reminding stone what it remembered. The fighting ebbed and flowed. A salted wind rose for no reason he could see and then died again under the walls, leaving a taste of iron on the air. Ramsay gathered what was left of the best of the Dreadfort's men and put their backs to the mews where the falcons screamed at smells none of their keepers could soothe them through. "There," he said and pointed at John, and there was a kind of relief in his face because now everything had its shape. The bastard! John walked into the shape Ramsay drew like a man stepping into a well-worn boot. He raised his sword. The wolves fanned so they were there and not there, constellations to make men dizzy if they looked too long. Ramsay smiled as if his mouth had never learned any other shape. He was good with a blade. He had spent years finding ways to cut men that taught them something about pain they had never known. John could feel it in the economy of the first thrust, the way Ramsay used the slope of the yard beneath their feet, the little slice he hunted for under John's arm. John answered without flourish. Ghost was a weight at the corner of his eye. The battle sounds narrowed to the ring clink of steel and the quiet, wet noises men make when they are dying. Ramsay darted in, quick as anger, cut the edge of John's sleeve and nicked skin. "You," he breathed, low and almost tender, "were supposed to be dead." "I have been," John said, and in that simple truth there lay the cold that saved him. He let the wolf into his hands. He did not mean he let Ghost take the sword. He meant that he forgot about anything but the line from his shoulder through his wrist and out into the air, and how that line should draw itself to cross the one Ramsay drew. He thought it, and his arm knew. Their blades kissed and slid. It was nothing like the yard with Ser Roderick when John had been a squire and so sure that his life was something a man could plan. It was a slow language, old as certain winter nights, and it told this story. One of us will be the thing that ends. Ramsay tried to use men like he had always used them. Shoved a guard half a pace to the left to clog John's step, flicked a feint that promised a different body's death and expected the body to take it. The guard did not move like a trained piece. He flinched from a gray flash that was only the ghost of a bite at his ankle. Ramsay swore. The old woman from the river said something in a language no man remembered, and one of the wolves lifted his head and howled long and steady, and the pitch of the day shifted. John stepped inside the curve of Ramsay's sword, put Longclaw's dark mouth against Ramsay's ribs, and pushed. He did not do it fast. He drove the blade in like a spade into frozen ground, steadily, using all of winter's patience. The two of them stood like that for a breath and a half, a thing of too much intimacy, men so close their breath mingled. Ramsay's eyes were wide. They were not mad now. They were startled, like a boy's when some new rule of the world shows itself by doing exactly what it has always done. Blood came out of him through his mouth in a thin line. It beaded on his lip and turned to a pink icicle in the same breath. John pulled the sword out. Ramsay's knees forgot what they were. He sat and then lay and then made the little movements dying men make when their bodies can no longer imagine themselves whole and yet try. The wolves came because wolves are not sentimental. John stood between them and the dying thing, and for a moment they hesitated, because men can be pack and because Ghost was at the center. "No," John said, not loudly, and the pack swallowed their hunger. Ramsay lifted a hand as if he wanted to say something and did not find any words. The hand fell. He was meat an instant later, nothing more or less. The wolves did not make a savoring of it. They ate like winter eats, efficient, sure. Roose Bolton did not fight John. He did not fight anyone at all. By the time John crossed the yard, Roose was measuring the angle of the shadow under the hall's eaves as if he could make time tilt and pour him somewhere else. He had put his blade aside. He had done it somewhere between one breath and the next, but he had done it. That said more than words ever would have. "It appears," he said, the calm back where he liked it, "the North has grown wolves." "The North remembered its own," John answered. Roose's eyes were pale coins that bought nothing. "Men love their old tales. They make new mistakes while telling them. Some mistakes have names," John said, and he thought of Bran beyond the wall, and Arya's ghost in every lash of snow, and Sansa with a letter that no one knew she held, and a father under stone with a sword across his lap. He thought of Winterfell's stones under his feet and what it meant to stand on them with his sword bare. Bolton is one of those. Roose glanced at the wolves with a small tightening at the corner of his mouth. "I suppose you mean to let them judge me. The North will judge you." John did not have to say what that meant. The men watching from the yard's edge, the hillmen with blood on their knives, the free folk with old griefs, the Manderley men who had come with a fat lord's sly blessing after White Harbor, had taken its own in meat and learned the taste of vengeance. These were the North's eyes. Roose inclined his head, as if accepting a thing that bored him. "You are not a Stark." "I am," John said, and the word fit him like the other skin he wore. He had not had to say it at the Heart Tree. He said it now where men could hear. The wolves lifted their heads in one of those small, uncanny unisons, the way a wind moves through a field and all the grass follows one thought. They hanged Roose Bolton in the yard where the snow had turned pink and then white again. It took a little longer than it should have in weather this cold, and that was justice of a kind. Men who had lost brothers to flayers stood and watched with quiet eyes and did not turn away. When it was done, a boy from the Norries cut him down with a knife that had belonged to his mother and gave the body to the snow, which takes everything at last. Winterfell took a long breath after. Men began to think of food and wounds and where they might lay themselves where no wolf would step on them. The heart tree let fall a leaf. It landed on Jon's shoulder and clung there, and Melisandre watched it with a gaze that made him feel again as if she carried a shadow of high S-shape in her sleeve. She came to him when the day had gone down and the wolves were bones that the snow covered as fast as it could. "They will call you," she said quietly, an odd mercy in her tone, as if she had learned to put on gentleness like a cloak for just this night. "And names will be knives and crowns both. They can call me what they like," Jon said. He was tired in a way that made the world heavy and slow. "They will be wrong or right in their mouths either way. Will you be king in the north then?" Her voice tasted the words. He thought of all the things king meant. Bread and blood and 1,000 small mercies and cruelties that must be chosen and would be told of you long after your sleep was taken. He thought of walls older than men and things coming on the cold air that no throne could stop. He thought of a boy wrapped in roots and green dreams and of a girl with a wolf that had called a river its home. He thought of Ghost, whose fur glowed ghost pale even without moon. "I will be what the North needs," he said. It was not an answer for songs. It was the only one he had. The Manderleys arrived 2 days later while the snow was still remembering footsteps. They brought with them carts that had bread hidden under oats and meat hidden under barley. They brought sly smiles and careful oaths and a fat man who made a small church of his chair and looked like a lord who had taught himself all the wrong lessons and learned the right ones instead. Wyman Manderley ate with gusto and watched Jon over a hunk of pie as if he were measuring him for a story. "A Stark in Winterfell," he said at last, as if tasting it. "My belly's full of those words." "Then take care you don't lose them," Jon said. He had no gift for court-like speech. It had no gift for him. The feast they threw tasted of victory and ash both. The hall steamed with men's bodies and smelled of fat and leather and wet wool. They sang too fast and forgot the verses everyone always forgot, and the laughter had a heartbeat in it that was the drum that men beat when they are not yet certain what shape the morning will take. The wolves lay under the high table and pretended to sleep, one eye open. Ghost's head rested on Jon's boot. The old woman with river bones sat against the wall and did not eat, and the red woman stared at the flames as if the whole world were in there and she was reading it back to front. Later, when the hall had gone to snores and the night had pressed its fingers against the shutters, Jon went out into the yard. The snow was not falling for once. The stars were hard. Ghost rose and shook himself, sending frost like dust into the air. Jon walked to the gate and down into the night where the light of Winterfell did not reach. There was a sound then, not wolf, not wind. It was as if the night drew a slow breath and held it. The hair on Jon's arms pricked. In the white plain beyond the great walls, a small darkness moved. It was nothing, could be nothing. He stood and watched it as a man watches his own dreams when he is afraid to sleep. Ghost made a sound in his throat, something very like a word that was not a word. "Remember." "I know," Jon said. The thing that moved in the dark was a thought for another day. Wolves do not make promises. They keep pacts. The North began to come back to itself in small stubborn ways. Men buried their dead with their names if they had them, and if they did not, they buried them with snow and a muttered oath that someone would make it right one day. The hillmen went back to their rocks with their knives cleaned and the look of men who know the road back to a place if they ever need it again. The free folk did not hurry away. They liked the way Winterfell's smoke lay against the sky. They liked the bread. Some of them even liked the way the old god's eyes watched them without needing anything in return. They slipped between men who had been enemies yesterday and were trying to be brothers again without remembering how to be friends. Ghost hunted alone when Jon did not need him and came back smelling of deer or nothing. They found the flayed men's racks in a storehouse and burned them. The fire made a low, hungry sound and then a quieter one, almost a sigh. The heat on Jon's face made him close his eyes. He wondered, Then, what the night would make of this warm place kept like a stubborn coal in a cold hearth. He wondered if the night had eyes and a will, or if it was only a great slow empty thing that did not think about men at all. He wondered what it meant that he had died and come back and wore 2 skins and could call wolves as an old lord calls hounds with a whistle. He wondered if any of that was enough. "King!" a boy shouted in the yard the next day, bold with other boys' laughter. "King in the north!" John turned and the word hit him like a thrown stone. For a heartbeat, he was angry. Not at the boy, but at the world that wanted to make a tidy shape out of a thing that was going to require the whole messy summer flood of men's lives. Then the anger went the way good anger does and turned to something he could use. He picked up a handful of snow and packed it to a ball and tossed it lightly at the boy, who yelped with mock horror and fled and then returned almost at once because boys have short roads between fear and joy. "I am the watch's bastard," John called after him, letting his voice carry just enough to find the ears that were looking for argument. "I am Ned Stark's son. I am what the North needs me to be. If you need a king to do your work for you, find a different hearth. If you are hungry, follow me to the kitchens and help me keep the bread from burning." They laughed, some of them. Others did not. Laughter does not tell you everything. Work does. He sent Manderley men back to White Harbor with messages that were not clever but were clean. The North would have its own again. Those who had drowned men in winter would be named and hanged. Those who had bent their backs to strangers to save their people could come back and straighten them. He sent Crowfoot Umber a skin full of mountain ale and a piece of white banner torn in battle and the simple words that he would have older oaths honored. He sent to the Wolfswood and the Hornwood and the lonely farms and the little villages buried under the white where women wove and men set traps in the snow. And he sent not promises but wolves. A wolf nosing into your yard at dusk says more than a letter ever will. At night he went to the God's Wood and listened. Sometimes the leaves said nothing. Sometimes they said remember. Sometimes they creaked like an old ship and he saw a boy with a face too old for it looking at him through dreams. Once, he felt a river and a great she-wolf running along it with 1,000 children behind, and he smiled there in the dark because there are truths so big you must laugh at them or choke. The snows did not end. The world put on ice like a second skin and wore it comfortably. There were raids to stop and debts to pay and names to dig up from beneath lies. The wolves dwindled as winter took deer and cold took the sick and births did not keep pace with what steel had done. John felt each loss like a cut. He gave the dead to the God's Wood when he could, and when he could not, he gave them to the white and whispered thanks. Pack keeps count. He kept count. When spring came, it would not be a melting all at once. It would come in little bits, water under ice, a black patch on a south-facing slope, a bird that dared to sing when the air was still cruel. John knew this without having to sit with a maester and talk about it. He knew it because the wolves knew it. He knew it because men's eyes began to change a little, to look out and not only down. A moon after Ramsay's end, Wyman Manderley held court with a half-barrel of ale at his elbow and a grin like a dock's crane and said words other men wanted written in ink on top of a page for bards to touch their hats to. "Here stands the white wolf," he said, standing fat and proud and red in the face with simple joy. "The son of Eddard of the blood of the first men. King in the north." The hall took it up because men must take something up. The words ran through rafters and down beams and into boots and then out into the yard and the kitchen and the kennels and the God's Wood, where ghosts listened and said nothing. John stood and let the words wash over him and passed. He saw in the shouting a river in flood. If you stand in it, it will take you where it wants. If you stand with your feet right, it will push past your thighs and you will still be there when it is done. He raised a hand for quiet, and men remembered they were men with throats that could shut. "I will not wear a crown of steel," he said. "I will not sit in halls and forget the sound of snow. If you want me to be king in the north, then bring me wood for the dead and bread for the living. Bring me your quarrels and your knives and your children and your oaths. If you mean to leave me for the crows the first time I tell you something you do not want to hear, then do it now and save us the labor." There was a silence. It was not the bad kind. It held the weight of men thinking, and thinking is a labor as holy as prayer when men do it honestly. Wyman Manderley's grin did not dim. "I have no love for iron crowns," he said. They never fit my head. I have love for truth. You are what we have, my lord. By the old gods and the new, you are what we have. The mountain clansmen thumped their spears. The free folk shrugged in their particular way that said they did not care what a man called himself so long as his hands stayed his and his word held. The Manderley men shouted the name, and the name grew wild as a bonfire thrown too much pine. Later, the red woman joined him in the quiet under the heart tree. You surprised them, she said, and there was approval in it, as if he had been a good fire. I mean to keep surprising my enemies, John said, and my friends as little as I can. She looked at Ghost curled at the tree's root, red eyes half-lidded, and then at the face on the trunk. There are darker names coming, she said softly. They walk on feet that leave no prints. They speak a language ice remembers. When they come, the wolves will not be enough. He nodded. I know. And still you chose to set your face south first. He thought of a cold so profound it stopped thinking, of a silence so complete it unmade names. He thought of men who could not fight it because they had sold their courage to fear in small coins every day for years until no courage was left when they needed it. The North needed its hands back, he said. A man with no hands cannot hold a sword no matter how much he wants to. She inclined her head, and the rubies on her throat caught starfire. We have lit a light, she said. Pray that it burns long enough. He did not pray. He put his hand on the tree and let the old silence receive him. In it, he felt Ghost as he would feel his own blood, and beyond Ghost he felt the faintest, thinnest threads of other wolves, moving in ways that said they belonged to the world still. He felt a current traveling down the rivers, a great she-wolf in the south hauling a living shadow after her through thicket and marsh. He felt a boy who was and was not a boy slipping through roots like ink through paper. He felt the wall as a thing alive with sleeping, and beyond it, far footsteps so cold the world hid from them. He stood there a long time, until his back had taken the shape of the tree and his breath had slowed to a winter rhythm. When he turned, the snow took his prints and the night held its breath for a beat and then let it go again. He walked back to the hall where men slept and dreamed dreams of crowns and meat and women and battles that had gone in ways they had liked. Ghost padded at his side in that noiseless way that made men touch amulets when they noticed it. Winter had been taught a new voice. It was made of howls, yes, and of steel, and of men's voices saying each other's names without lying. When it spoke, the North listened, and when the cold that does not think came at last out of its patient dark, it found a country that had remembered itself in time, a country that had put flesh back on its old bones and taught itself to be hungry for the right things again. The wolf's breath smoked on morning air. Jon Snow stood with his hand on Ghost's neck and looked north with eyes that held 2 winters' worth of knowing. He was what he had decided to be. He was the White Wolf. He was a Stark. He did not wear a crown, but the North wore him, and the North did not forget.